Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, we have an absolutely massive, mind-bending topic to unpack today. We're diving headfirst into a sprawling alternative history known as the Tartaria theory, specifically looking at an extensive analysis from Mind Unveiled. So I'm going to ask you to just temporarily set aside what you think you know about history, relax your mind, and follow along. This theory attempts to literally rewrite everything, from our ancient origins right up to modern timelines. And we're going to systematically break down this incredibly complex labyrinth of claims step by step.
So here's our roadmap for the day. First, we'll examine the Tartaria map anomaly. Then we'll look at Plato and the flood. After that, we'll uncover the secret Irish connection, explore the idea of a global spiritual empire, and finally, we'll face what's known as the mud flood cataclysm.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the Tartaria Map Anomaly, a cartographic mystery.
If you flip through mainstream encyclopedia entries, you'll see maps from the 1800s where Tartary is depicted simply as an Asiatic landmass, basically right where Russia and China sit today, filled with standard Mongolian or Chinese city names. But if you look back at maps from the 1600s, well, things get weird. Suddenly we see Great Tartaria presented as a massive, unified, pre-Russian global empire with entirely different etymological city names. Plus, these 17th century maps feature other wild anomalies, like showing California as an island.
Now, mainstream history generally brushes these older map discrepancies off as simple geographical errors. But the source material asks a really vital question here. Considering cartography was a highly precise art form, is this really just a messaging mistake? Or are we looking at the literal erased footprint of a massive global empire? To figure out where this supposed empire might have come from, the theory requires us to take a huge historical leap backward.
Which brings us to Section 2, Plato and the Flood, Ancient Records of Cataclysm.
To understand this, the theory points out just how convoluted the preservation of ancient knowledge actually is. Take Plato's work, Critias. In it, a young man named Critias is telling Socrates a story. But where did he get it? Well, Critias heard it at age 10 from his grandfather. His grandfather heard it from his great-grandfather, who originally got it from Solon, one of the wise sages of Greece. And Solon, he heard it while visiting Egypt, directly from an Egyptian priest. It's basically an ancient game of telephone, showing us just how incredibly fragile the preservation of human history really is. Now, during this exchange in Egypt, Solon tries to impress the priest with Greek esoteric knowledge, and the priest just completely shuts him down with this powerful quote, "Oh, Solon, Solon, you Hellenes are never anything but children, and there is not an old man among you." The source highlights this specific exchange to illustrate a crucial pillar of the theory, the idea that the ancient Greeks actually lacked their own deeply rooted traditions. The priest is dismissively implying that the Greeks are, well, historical toddlers who lost their past. The Egyptian priest goes on to explain exactly why the Greeks lost their history, stating that multiple cataclysms periodically wipe out mankind. He breaks these historical resets down into two distinct flavors. First, destructions by fire, represented by the myth of Phaeton's chariot burning the earth, which devastated people living on mountains and lofty places. And second, destructions by water, or a deluge, which wiped out the cities and lowlands, leaving only the herdsmen in the mountains alive. It's this water cataclysm, the massive flood that destroyed Atlantis, that sets the stage for the next incredible claim.
Moving right along to Section 3, the secret Irish connection, preservers of the Old World.
Following the historical breadcrumbs, the source investigates the origins of the word Tartaria itself and finds a super fascinating linguistic link. If you look at Gaelic etymology, the word Tardar actually means a great noise, a confusion, or a bustling uproar. Historically, it was also used as slang for a thief, sometimes attributed to an old story of an Irish soldier catching a tartar in battle. So, definitely not the sauce you put on your fish sticks. The theory uses this etymological clue to suggest that the origins of the Tartarian Empire are fundamentally tied to the ancient Irish.
I know, it sounds wild, right? This completely flips our standard view of human migration on its head. Mainstream history teaches us that human civilization and knowledge generally migrated from east to west. But this alternative theory argues the exact opposite. It claims that a group of Atlantean survivors managed to escape that great flood, landed in Ireland, and preserved the ancient sciences. From Ireland, they eventually traveled outward, and knowledge flowed from west to east to help rebuild humanity. So imagine if everything you were taught about the great Phoenician sea explorers was just a cover story. Because if the ancient Irish were actually the root of global civilization, you've got to wonder, why aren't they in the history books? Well, the theory accounts for this by claiming their achievements were intentionally rebranded. The source asserts that Phoenician was merely a cover name, a label given by the later Greeks and Romans to obscure the true identity of these ancient Irish sea explorers, systematically writing them completely out of the historical record.
Which leads us to Section 4, a global spiritual empire, the Golden Age of Tartaria.
According to the source, these traveling Irish magi were responsible for gifting foundational knowledge to a devastated post-flood world. They allegedly developed the first agriculture and common grains. They brought the discovery of fire and invented basic tools. They distributed alphabets to unenlightened races, built advanced stone megaliths, which they say explains why we find similar ancient architecture all over the globe, and most importantly, they seeded all major global religions based on a unified system of astrotheology. To back this up, the source re-examines ancient terms strictly through an etymological and astrological lens. Take the term Aryan, for example. The theory argues this originally had absolutely nothing to do with modern destructive concepts of race. Instead, it was derived from Aries, the ram, the first sign of the zodiac. In this context, it simply meant a person of a higher spiritual class or a spiritual guide who possessed the knowledge of God.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the source redefines other familiar words to support the idea of a unified astrotheological culture. Look at the word pyramid. The source breaks it down phonetically into pi, re, made, translating it as the paternal power of the ram. The heavy use of ram symbolism across completely different ancient religions, from Egyptian pharaohs named Ramses to Moses being depicted with horns of knowledge, is presented as physical evidence of this single, globally shared spiritual origin.
Okay, time for Section 5, the Mud Flood Cataclysm, the Fall and the Cover-Up.
So, the big question: if this highly advanced, unified, and peaceful spiritual empire covered the entire globe, where did it go? Brace yourself, because this is the dramatic climax of the theory. According to the source, the cataclysmic, world-breaking event that wiped them out didn't happen in the misty depths of ancient antiquity. They claim it occurred a mere 300 to 400 years ago. Yep, you heard that right.
The physical mechanism for this sudden, brutal reset is described as a catastrophic mix of earthquakes, comets, and what the theory calls mud floods. The idea here is that water rushing from high mountain altitudes mixed with massive amounts of soil, creating literal rivers of solid mass that swept across the globe. This event allegedly buried the first floors of grand advanced architecture under thick layers of earth. Ever walked past an old historic building and noticed half-buried basement windows sitting right at street level? Well, the theory claims this mud flood is exactly why.
Now we come to the source material's most highly controversial claims regarding who exactly took over after the dust settled. The theory asserts that specific ancient groups, which they identify as early Roman and certain early Jewish sects, hijacked the surviving Druidic, or Irish, knowledge. According to the claims, these groups became corrupt, allegedly utilizing dark magic to orchestrate or take advantage of the cataclysm, and systematically rewrote the history books to erase Great Tartaria and establish themselves as the ultimate victors.
So how on earth does the theory justify this massive historical blind spot? They point to a rapid succession of physical clues supposedly left behind, things like unexplained, fully built underground cities beneath our modern ones, a strangely unified style of classical architecture found simultaneously across Europe, Asia, and North America, and a concept they call phantom time, pointing to old 17th century maps and East India Company records that allegedly show a letter I before the year, rather than the number R, suggesting an altered, fabricated calendar timeline.
To encapsulate the entire philosophy of this alternative worldview, the source leans on this famous quote by Napoleon Bonaparte, "What is history but a fable agreed upon?" And honestly, the central theme of the Tartaria theory is exactly that. It suggests that when two cultures clash, the loser is totally obliterated and the winner writes a fable, disparaging the conquered and glorifying themselves for all of recorded time.
We've covered a lot today, from map anomalies and ancient Irish civilizations to a global spiritual empire and a cataclysmic mudflood. Whether you view this as a fascinating thought experiment, a massive misinterpretation of history, or maybe even a hidden truth, the source leaves us with one ultimate provocative question to ponder. Looking back at the accepted history we're all taught in schools, ask yourself, do I truly understand what this reality is?